Moving forward, still on Zimbabwe, the Constitutional Court has dismissed a petition by opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai challenging Mr. Mugabe's re-election. Mr. Tsvangirai's party had withdrawn the challenge on Friday. The court ruled that the elections were free, fair and credible. Meanwhile, South African President Jacob Zuma also announced today that his appointment as mediator in the Zimbabwe crisis is now over, citing the successful election. SADC was instrumental in bringing about the unity government between Mr. Mugabe and Mr. Tsvangirai. Part of Mr. Zuma's mandate was to ensure the completion of a constitution and elections. Now, to discuss this further, we are joined by Blessing Zulu of VOA's Zimbabwe service. Thanks so much for joining us today, Blessing.
Thank you so much, Ndimyake. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Now, even though the Constitutional Court formally dismissed this petition, the MDC had already done so on Friday. Is that considered a concession, or did the opposition concede in this case?
I think even when they filed the petition in the first place, there were disagreements amongst MDC members, with some saying that it was a waste of time to take the matter to the courts. And remember, most of the judges, if not all, are appointed by President Robert Mugabe. So some members were saying actually it was useless. And at the end of the day, I think it is that idea that it was a waste of time to go to the courts that actually prevailed.
Okay. So but in other words, what is the MDC saying now in terms of how it proceeds from here? Is it going to accept that President Mugabe is the legitimate winner of these past elections and that they will...
I don't think so. I think what Mr. Tsvangirai has started doing since last week is to go and consult with his grassroots supporters in the eastern parts of the country, in Mwakalyelye, and I understand he will be going to all the provinces. I think what they are trying to do is to mobilize the people to actually protest, but they are still maintaining that this election was far from being free and fair.
Now, what does the MDC do in light of the fact that President Zuma and SADC as a whole have literally washed their hands of the opposition claims that this election was not free, fair and transparent, and that, in fact, they want the U.S. to drop sanctions, and they're going to attend the inauguration on Thursday. Is this to say that they're leaving the MDC high and dry? What can the MDC count on Zuma and SADC and AU to do for them at this point? I
think the decision by SADC and the African Union is not surprising to many who have studied how these organizations work. They are rather comfortable with a policy that I would call containment, as long as Zimbabweans are not protesting, as long as there are no killings. The Southern African Development Community, or SADC, is okay with that. So is the African Union. I think their only best hope is to deal with Washington and also the European Union to at least apply pressure to some of these African countries, because even as Mr. Mugabe won by a landslide, there are reports that many people are being displaced in most parts of Zimbabwe, especially in the rural areas. So it becomes difficult, for example, for Washington to say we are now dealing with Zimbabwe, yet there are those reports that are coming that there's violence that is still going on.
Perpetuated by alleged ZANU-PF
supporters, yes.
Now, this issue of sanctions, I suspect the MDC is going to be put in an awkward position, because it had also been calling for the dropping of sanctions, saying that it was hurting the country as a whole. What do you suspect will be, or what do you hear from your reporting will happen in terms of the MDC trying to get the US and the Europe to apply more pressure if it's not through sanctions?
I think the only alternative is through sanctions, of course, because there's nothing, they have no leverage really on this Zimbabwe issue, except to push for sanctions. Because remember,
they've been saying the sanctions are hurting the Zimbabwean people. Yeah, can they really turn around now and say, the sanctions actually are good?
No, the only reason why they were trying to push for the removal of sanctions, at least from the MDC perspective, was to make sure that at least there was going to be an election that will not be disputed. But unfortunately, they are disputing this one. So I think they will still continue to push for the tightening of sanctions.
Okay, now very briefly, the inauguration for President Mugabe is scheduled to happen on Thursday. What are you hearing about that?
Yes, his spokesperson has confirmed that it's on Thursday, and it's going to be held at the National Sports Stadium. I think this is something new, because usually it's at the State House. But they are saying that they are going to, I think it's a show of power, to bring many people to fill the 60,000-seater National Stadium for the inauguration. And they are saying they are inviting many African leaders to attend.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Blessing
Thank
Zulu.
you,
We'll
Ndimyake.
probably have you back to tell us about the aftermath of that.
Thank you.
All right. Blessing Zulu is a reporter with VOA Studio 7, a live daily radio program broadcasting to Zimbabwe. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is VOA Africa 54. And of course, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com.